and we're excited to be bringing you today's Culture of Research and Education webinar called Literature Review Strategies for Doctoral Research. The core webinar series is designed to provide faculty, students, and alumni an opportunity to share their research and scholarship with the Trident community. By fostering a culture of professional development and idea exchange, participants will have access to a valuable forum for lifelong learning. This university-wide effort is coordinated by Trident's doctoral studies directors. A couple notes before we begin today's session. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And if you want to ask any questions, which you can do at any time during the webinar, just find your control panel, go about halfway down. You'll see a question box and submit the questions there, or comments there, or any advice you want to. We'll share as much as we can with our panelists. And while everyone is muted, if you have any issues submitting questions that way, you can always email them to me directly. My email's on the screen. This webinar will be recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the webinar and a copy of the slides by early next week. Today we'll be welcoming a few presenters. First up is Dr. Indira Guzman, Doctoral Studies Director in the Glenn R. Jones College of Business Administration and a Professor of IT Management. She's been a faculty member and dissertation mentor at Trident since 2006. Her research has been published in over 50 academic outlets. Next, we'll be joined by Dr. Ken Cromer. Dr. Cromer is a military veteran and a recipient of Trident's Teaching Excellence Award, I believe the very first one, too. And he's active with PhD students, and previously he was a PhD mentor. Received his master's at Troy University and a bachelor's at Excelsior College. Sorry about that. My computer was freezing. And we'll also be joined by two current doctoral students who Dr. Guzman will introduce later. But I'm going to hand things off to Dr. Guzman to get today's presentation started. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Danny, for your introduction, and welcome everyone to the webinar, Literature Review Strategies for Doctoral Research. This webinar is organized by the Glenn R. Jones College of Business at Trident at American Intercontinental University. Dr. Kenneth Cromer, the Professor of Doctoral Studies for the Ph.D. program in Business Administration, and myself have prepared this presentation to provide doctoral students with an opportunity to discuss some of the strategies that all doctoral students should follow in order to develop a useful literature review. In addition, we will hear from two of our own graduates. Dr. Robert Robinson is a doctoral candidate in our PhD program, and he just successfully defended his dissertation 3 weeks ago, and is working on the revision. So congratulations for your successful defense, Robert, and thank you very much for joining us today and share your experience writing your PhD dissertation. We will also have with us Mr. Ryan Durbin. He is a doctoral candidate in the DBA program in our professional doctorate, and he just successfully defended his proposal defense also 2 weeks ago. So congratulations for that achievement, and also for completing the IRB requirements. So he also completed his literature review chapter recently, and we also thank him for sharing with us his experience writing the literature review for in our DBA program. And finally, I want to thank Dr. Cromer, who is the Professor of Doctoral Studies in the PhD DBA program. So let's talk about this topic. It's a very important topic for both the DBA program as well as the PhD program. We want to emphasize more on the PhD program, since we have here Dr. Cromer, but I think we all are going to find this discussion useful from any perspective. As you know, you are required to write assignments, and the final product of the program is your dissertation or your doctoral study project. In both, you should build knowledge on top of existing knowledge. So there is this, you're adding knowledge to the field, and the only way you can add is by knowing what is out there, what has been written, what do we know so far. And in addition, doctoral students need to know what has been done so far about the specific topic and demonstrate that expertise and to justify the gap in the research. Remember that the main problem statement for a PhD dissertation is a theoretical problem. So there's a problem in a theoretical problem, either some practical problem that doesn't have a theoretical explanation, or a theory that doesn't reflect reality and needs to be tested further or needs to be extended. So again, it's a theoretical problem. In the DBA program, we have a practical problem, something in a business, in a context, in an organizational perspective that it's happening. It's a problem, it's a business problem, it's a practical problem, and that's why we do applied research. In both instances, you need to show, okay, what is the problem, and justify it, and use, again, existing knowledge, and show this expertise on the topic. When you complete your dissertation or your doctoral study, you will be known as an expert in a specific area, and again, as an expert in that area, you need to show that you know what has been done. And of course, you complete the assignments during coursework. There are specific assignments during coursework that allow you to build on that literature, on that knowledge, on that understanding, and you will demonstrate in writing your knowledge when you formulate that research project, either your dissertation or your doctoral study. So that is a very important conceptual framework. Here we have a quote. This quote says, a substantive, thorough, sophisticated literature review is a precondition for doing substantive, thorough, sophisticated research. A researcher cannot perform significant research without first understanding the literature in the field. So we want to emphasize here that the quality of your literature review is really going to mark the quality of your final research. The more you know about the field, the better you're going to formulate the hypothesis or the research questions or even the research design. So that's why it's a precondition. It is part of the process. And I know that many students say, I don't have a strategy, I just know that I have to do with the requirement and I start writing. But we want all of us to remember that it's very important process, but it's not a simple process. It is going to require multiple steps, and that's what we want to discuss today. What kind of strategies can you adopt, and what kind of strategies our doctoral students have adopted to be successful in writing this chapter 2. Now, most of the literature review is done before data collection, but some of it is also needed even after you obtain your results, because you need to compare them with previous findings and you need to close the loop. So the process is not really over at the end, but again, the better your literature review is done, the more thorough it is, the better is going to be your dissertation. Now, there are two different types of literature review: the conceptual literature as well as the research literature. I mean, we just want to distinguish those two because especially in business administration, there's a lot of literature that refers to what has been written by authorities, authorities in the field, in business, in the market. opinions, ideas, things that are from practitioner literature, but at the same time, theories that are written by experts and experiences. So that is also literature, right? It's not only the journal articles, that's also literature. And depending on the program that you are doing, either the DBA or the PhD, in the DBA, you're going to emphasize a lot on, again, practice, right? And then but also use research literature. In the PhD, you're going to emphasize mostly on research literature. That means we need to know what were the previous findings, what are the research results, what kind of scholarly papers have been published in what journals, know about the, today we're going to talk about the kind of steps that you want to follow, but again, the research literature is everything that has data, and that those could be reports, and obviously those could also be a dissertation. So the literature review is really a very essential part of the doctoral research process. And something very important, this literature review is not something that you just start writing. As I said, it really has, it's really a two-phase activity. First, you conduct the review by identifying appropriate resources, searching for relevant materials, and analyzing, synthesizing, and organizing those results. And then the next phase is going to be the actual writing of the review that will culminate this project. So that's why this we have these 8 steps that show you the process that we can follow. This step, something important is that these steps are not necessarily sequential. You will probably move back and forth between them. It really it's a way to immerse yourself, and this process needs to be adapted to your own needs. But remember that the goal is to obtain a detailed, like cutting-edge knowledge of your particular topic, since you will be known as an expert in that area. So let's look at these steps. The first one is identify keywords or descriptions. So first, we assume that you already have a working research question and working title of your doctoral study or dissertation. Remember that it's okay that this is not a final one. You will usually we start broad, and then as you learn more about the topic, you continue narrow down to something that is more doable and more feasible. But you should begin creating a preliminary working title of your study that allows you to focus yourself in what is it you want to know, what is it you want to do in your research. And because it's a working title, again, you can always revise it, but you have something in mind. I mean, one of the tricks that I learned is to, once you have your working title or your main research question, you want to write it down in a little paper or a sticky note, and then stick it on top of your screen. And every time you find something interesting, look up to your research question or working title and see, is this related to my topic? Is this something useful? If it's useful, then I continue reading and I use it. But if it's not useful, if there's no relationship, it's something that is interesting, but it's not related to my research, then I should just put it aside and move on to the next article or finding that I find in the literature in any resource. So that's important. I mean, sometimes you get distracted as you find resources, and that's the risk, and that's the problem, because you spend more time than needed. Very important to identify again your topic, your potential dissertation or doctoral study title. So state your central research question. Usually that's the one that describes the main variables or concepts that you need to examine in your literature review. Then identify the key concepts in your title. And as a central research question, you might need, in many cases, the research question will incorporate all the variables and concepts that you wish to examine, or in some cases, it will be more like a list of topics and several research questions, actually, depending again on the project. So here you have an example. Say you have the what are the IT occupational. I mean, this was the study that I conducted about the IT occupational culture. So my study had several phases, and we looked at the characteristics of the occupational culture of the IT professionals, right? So that was like one of the initial phases. But then the research question of this particular study that I'm referring to was, okay, what are the IT occupational culture features? You know, what about this culture influences the commitment, the IT occupational commitment of the new IT graduates. So once the IT graduates start working in either their internship or their first job work experience, how these cultural features affect their commitment to the occupation. You know, what cultural features affect more or less. So that is the relationship you see. We're talking about, first we're talking about IT occupation, right? Information technology occupation, or some people call it profession, and some people just refer to IT majors, or we're talking about computing majors. I mean, when we talk about IT, in some literature refer to just computing. And then the other construct is a culture, but we're specifically talking about occupational culture. And then you have the other, the dependent variable here, IT occupational commitment. So what about commitment? What is commitment? And then if we focus more on the IT occupational commitment, specifically occupational commitment, right? And who are we talking about? Well, the IT graduates, new IT graduates. Some literature refer to them as newcomers, college graduates. So you see there are multiple names to the same concept that the researcher here is trying to study. So as a researcher, I need to know what other titles have other people used in the research in order to understand, you know, what research has been done and what have been the main findings. The next step is create a search query. And remember, we said that before we start writing, we have to use this strategy. So now that I know what I want, I learned that there are different ways of people calling it, and I will continue to learn those. I create my list of terms that I will be using, and I create this search query, and keep track of the keywords or descriptors that I use, and use the searching tools such as the Boolean operators. So Boolean operators will be things like and. You know, the and will allow me to search for items that have, say, multiple concepts. So say I want two concepts, right? Concept 1 and concept 2, and I'm looking for literature that have used both concepts. So I can use this and operator and say my concept 1 is IT major and my concept 2 is college graduates. So I am looking for any article that has both terms, both concepts. So if I want both concepts together, I will use the connector and it always has to go as uppercase to connect the two terms. And if I want these concepts, again, if these concepts are the combination of more than one word, then they should use we should use quotation marks for each of the concepts. So you see concept 1 and in uppercase is concept 2, and I'm looking for articles that have both. Many of our students use that, especially when they are looking for empirical papers. Say, I want to use job satisfaction, but I need papers that talk about job satisfaction that have hypotheses, just to make sure that they are empirical, because if they're empirical, most likely they're going to use the word hypothesis. So I can use job satisfaction, right? That's going to be concept 1, and in upper cases, and put the other concept, which is going to be hypothesis. And that's going to search for papers that talk about job satisfaction and that also have hypotheses in it, which will be empirical papers. So that connector is useful when you search, and it works not only in search engines like Google, but also in the library databases like, say, ProQuest or EBSCO. The other connector is OR, which it basically broadens the search to either concept 1 or concept 2. So it's going to be either IT majors or computing majors. Again, always use uppercase. And finally, the operator not will be used to obtain items with concept 1, but eliminating concept 2. So I want IT majors, but I don't want, say, education, because I want those who are already graduated, so who are already working in the field. Therefore, I'm not that interested in what relates to education, but rather the work environment. And finally, truncation, and that is just using the different symbols, like asterisk or question mark or the money symbol, that would allow you to replace a series of characters, right? So you just say psychology and the asterisk, and then search for words. So those are just ways to make your search a little cleaner and faster and save time. We're going to go to the next step, and Dr. Cromer.
Okay. Once we know how to conduct the searches, it's important to know where to conduct the searches and what are some good strategies for finding relevant literature. So I want to share a few of those with you. One is scrubbing using Google Scholar. Everybody's familiar with Google. It's one of the most powerful search engines out there. Just as Google searches the web, Google Scholar searches academic literature. And so there's some key features in Google Scholar that make it a real good place to start. One is when you Google using Google Scholar and it brings up the hit that tells you, identifies an article for you, it also tells how many times that article has been cited. It gives you a good indicator as to the quality of the article. If a lot of people are citing that academic article, then it's probably a pretty good article. If nobody's citing it and it's an older article, maybe it's one to stay away from. But use your keywords there. One disadvantage to Google Scholar is some of the articles that it identifies to you are available, and you go in and you'll be able to see the article, download the article. When that happens, a strategy that you want to take anytime you look at an article is first go to the abstract and read the abstract. After you read the abstract, then go all the way to the end of the article and read the conclusion. Once you read the abstract and the conclusion, you have a pretty good idea if that article is relevant to what you're doing. And that's one way to kind of narrow it down, because you may have thousands of hits, thousands of articles identified. You have to narrow that some way. You do it first using the keyword search and restricting the time frame. But the other way you do it is by just reading the abstract and saying, is this relevant, not relevant? And that helps you narrow the field. Many times with Google Scholar, it doesn't actually take you to the article. What it takes you to is a paywall where you can then subscribe to a library to get that article. So what you want to do in that case is make sure you record the exact name of the article, who the authors were, what year it was published, get all that information, and then go into the Trident library. Now you can access Google Scholar inside the Trident library, but once you go in the Trident library, there are many search engines available. EBSCO, ProQuest. ProQuest is probably the one I spend the most time in. And those are databases that we have subscribed to as a university, and so we have access to those articles. And so go in and put that exact information in to get to the article you're looking for. And there are a number of databases. If you haven't gone into the Trident library and looked around, it's a good idea to go in and just try some of the databases out. Just get familiar with what's in there and what's available to you. As what you're really looking for in these searches is a handful of articles that are really super relevant to what you want to research. And once you have those articles that are very relevant to what you're interested in, a good way to do is to do something called snowballing. Someone call it networking. Well, what you want to do is go to, if you know that this article is really relevant to what you're trying to find, to what you're researching, then go to the end of the article to the reference page. Most people just skim right over the reference page, but if you're a researcher, you have to remember, particularly in the PhD world, in the doctoral world, you're not trying to do something from scratch. You're trying to find out what others have done, what's the current state of the research, and you're trying to build on that. You're trying to expand that bubble of what we know. And so if you find an article that's super relevant to what you want to research, go to that reference list, and that tells you the research that author used to build that paper. So you have a super relevant paper, go into that reference page, that gives you all the foundations that it was built from. And so you can snowball like that, and then go to those sources, read those if they're very relevant also to what you're doing, and then do the same thing, go to the reference page and snowball out. And one thing you have to watch doing snowballing is the age of the article. If an article was written last year, then the sources they used were probably within the last 5 years before that. If you go back to one of those sources and it's 3 to 5 years old, then the next set of articles you get to may be 10, 15 years old, and it's a little aged. You want to make most of your articles, most of your research, unless it's a seminal work, you want it to be something that's been published in the last 3 to 5 years, because you can't really build on current research if you don't know the current research. You want to know the current state of the research. But snowballing is a very good way to take a few really relevant articles and expand that out to a larger number of really relevant articles. Now, how many you're looking for? It depends on what you're researching. In my dissertation, my literature review consisted of 64 articles. That's not necessarily a very large number. Many people have several hundred articles. So what determines how many you need is what you need to find to really know the current state of research. You're not looking for the minimal thing you need to support what you want to say. You're looking to really understand and know what's going on out there to become the expert in whatever it is that you're researching. You want to look at you want to know what are the reputable sources in your discipline. You're looking for things, for journals that have been peer reviewed, for scholarly works. You're not so much looking for newspapers, trade magazines, things like that. You're looking for things that are truly reputable. The other strategy you want to use is know which academic disciplines are conducting research in your topic area. It may be that the thing that you're looking at, there may be current active research being done on that in the psychology discipline, and the management discipline, and the IT discipline, and a number of disciplines. And so to really know what's going on, particularly if what you're researching is something that's at the intersection of those disciplines, then you'll want to search in each of those areas to get the most current, most relevant research. Okay, once you find these articles, you have to do something with them. Now, I mentioned that I had 64 in mind. And it's not unusual to have many more than that. And you're going to be doing this research over a pretty large span of time. And no matter how excited you are about the article that you find that seems really super relevant, once you've looked at 100 after that, you're not going to remember who said what. So it's important to have a good system for organizing your research and keeping track of what you've done. One thing to do, and the time to start this is even back in your coursework, when you just run across an article that's really interesting to you, that you really think this is something I might want to hang on to. First, you want to log that reference information. You need all the information that you would need to put it on your reference page: authors' names, year of publication, name of the article, where did the article come from? If you got it online, what's the URL? You want them to be able to get back to that article. If you can, you want to download that article and just have it. You want to catalog it. By cataloging it, what I mean there is you need to record the information. It's not just enough to know who wrote the article, what the name was. You need to know what is it in that article that interested you. What was the thing? Was it a particular variable? Is there something in there that caused you to want to hang on to that article? And because when you want to come back and find out who said what, you run down your catalog, and then you can match up what you're looking for with where it came from. There's a lot of different ways to organize your research. and there's not one size that fits everybody. So what you want to do is identify the best way that works for you, and it may be a combination of ways. It may be several different strategies that you use. One of the best strategies is to use a spreadsheet to organize your research, and Dr. Guzman is going to talk to that a bit.
Thank you, Dr. Cromer. Well, we wanted to show you 3 different tools that you can find in the literature, and we are adding the references in our slides. But the 3 tools that we have here are, for example, the spreadsheet here from, this one is from Grad Coach. This is a website where you can download some tools, and we added the reference in our list of reference at the end of this presentation. But here you see they use multiple worksheets. So in the first one, it is really the use of like a development of a database of references, and then here is more like the statistics of what the summary of what references are available. But something neat here is copying the models that you find useful, the research models with independent and dependent variables that you find useful from other papers. And that's in another worksheet. In another one, there are the measures exactly as were used by previous authors, right? Again, the literature is copying pieces from the resources, and then the actual, if there were interview or survey questions. So the instruments are there, the measures, how they were asked to participate, the models. There's a summary of the literature, and again, this will be a database. Now, another tool that we actually have been using in our courses is this one. You will probably see in the concentration courses and in our wiki where we ask the students. This one is in a Word file, and the advantage of this one is that this one can go as part of your dissertation or doctoral study, right? So it's like summarizing whatever you read. You find, okay, what the author was, what dependent variables, what were the key references, the method, the unit of analysis, the main findings that are already summarized, the theories, what theories were used, and then the any comment that is useful to you for your research. This kind of things will have to be adapted anyway, but we give you some examples in the course. And finally, I'm just showing you an example of a literature review table used in an article. So where you see this is in an article already as a literature review of the IT capability of innovation, where the author looked at several papers. Here it's a 2-page table, and for each article they identified simply which one used which variable. So you see some articles use 2 of the 4 variables that the author is interested in, and some articles using 4. So it's just marking, but you see these kind of little tools really help you organizing, synthesizing your findings. Thank you.
There are a number of tools available to use when doing this. You can build your own spreadsheets. You can make your own setup. You can just download articles to your hard drive that you want to save. But there are several softwares out there that are very good tools to use. Mendeley is a real popular one. Zotero, EndNote. There are a number out there. We won't go into all of them here. But the important thing is to get familiar with those and look around at them and find out what works best for you. What's the easiest thing for you to use? And it may be a combination of tools to use. But finding, you work too hard to find the literature to not have a good system for retrieving the literature, for storing the literature, for keeping track of what you've found. Okay, with each article that you find, each piece of literature, it's important you critically read and analyze each one of them. So while you're collecting your literature, it's necessary to read it critically. As Dr. Guzman mentioned earlier, we're presenting these things as one step at a time, but they actually all happen at the same time. You use the search techniques Dr. Guzman talked about. You use the search engines I talked about. You find the literature and you log it and you catalog it. But you're also reading and analyzing, so you are not keeping everything. You're just keeping the things that are important to you. So the strategies to use, the one I mentioned earlier, read the abstract, read the conclusion, make sure that it's something that's relevant that you want to keep. If that's the case, then there's some things you want to know about it and you want to keep track of as you catalog. The first thing is what content of each article is relevant to your research. What important facts and opinions relate to your study? What are the theories that are used? It's very important to keep track of the theory, particularly as a PhD student, because what we do is we make a contribution to existing theory to increase the knowledge. So that's a big objective. So you want to keep track of what theories are presented in that paper. What does it bear on? What were the main findings of the study? What methodologies did they use? And you want to develop some kind of coding system so that you can identify the type of material that are contained on each summary sheet that you use of articles. And so there's several strategies you can do there. You can do it by theory. You may want to have a code that identifies the variable or construct that you're dealing with. I know when I did my dissertation, the main theory I built off was engagement theory. And so I had a number of articles that were about engagement, and they were at the higher level, the more abstract level, and then others that kind of mapped it down into attitude behavior theory, and then off into the different constructs that I identified in there. And so the code lets you go to it fast. So if I'm interested in job satisfaction, then the coding system that I use lets me easily go to, okay, these 10 articles are the ones out of this 200 that were really important, that I thought were really relevant about that aspect of what I'm looking at. So you just need a coding system that matches what you're doing so you can more easily retrieve things without having to read everything every time you want to know something. Then you want to synthesize the literature. Now, synthesizing, it involves comparing, contrasting, merging all these little pieces of information into one coherent whole that provides new perspectives. When you get to this point of the literature review, it's like a puzzle. You're trying to put together, how does everything fit together? This piece comes from this article, this piece comes from this article, this piece comes from that article. How do those fit together in a way that presents what I want to present? Because what you don't want to do in your literature review is present what this researcher said, present what this researcher said, present what this researcher said. What you want to do is take the things that all those researchers said, fit it together into one coherent statement that is what you're saying. And that's what synthesis comes in. It's taking and building on the work of others and looking what they did and build it into yours. So there's several things you do when you synthesize literature. You identify relationships among the studies. How is this study related to that study? You compare and contrast the works, ideas, theories, concepts from the various authors. You want to comment on the major themes and patterns you discovered. You want to show evidence of common results using data from multiple sources. If a lot of people research the same thing and there's something common that they all found, that's important. You want to bring that out. You want to discuss the pros and cons of the issues. It may be that they didn't look at it in the same way, so you want to contrast it, and they looked at it differently. Why did they look at it differently? If there's a conflict or a contradiction among the different sources, you want to bring that into some kind of synchronous thing that you're going to present that fits your argument, what you're doing. You want to point out the gaps in the literature. If a researcher covered something but didn't consider this and another one considered that in a different way, you want to bring out those gaps. Those gaps are what you're building on. if there are inconsistencies over studies across time, let's say everybody in this time frame was seeing things one way, and over time it morphed into something else. That's an important trend that you want to bring out. And what you want to be able to do is make generalizations across studies. I want to say that A, B, C, and D all found these things, and they all fit together to equal X, this new thing that I'm talking about. And that's synthesis. That's how you bring it together. Now you want to organize your literature. And you've got a lot of work invested in this already. You've been doing a lot of research, and you've been digging, you've been cataloging, you've been considering, you've been synthesizing, but you haven't written anything yet, and it's not time to write it yet. So now we get to how we're going to organize it. The first thing you want to do is you want to create a topic outline, an outline of your entire literature review. How is it going to roll out? A good strategy to take there is to go into, with Trident, is to go into your dissertation handbook, or your equivalent of the DBA program, and the outline there tells how you need to present the information. There's several strategies you can use to structure that, but start with that outline, and you want to completely outline what you're going to write based on what you've put together. There's some things you want to consider in doing that is how are you going to structure your review. A chronological review takes a look at things as they evolve, particularly useful if you're reviewing the background of the theory. As I mentioned before, when I looked at engagement theory, I went back to the early stages of that, which has had its roots in attitude behavior theory. And so I went through and identified that and talked about how that built into engagement theory and what it means and what all was involved there in a chronological way to show how the field evolved up to the current state. Another way to do it is thematic. Thematic, you want to take one thing at a time. Usually you would start with your dependent variable or dependent construct and really dig into that. When I did mine, I found one really relevant source, and my main dependent variable was engagement behavior. And so I dug into engagement behavior, and then I found there were dimensions of engagement behavior. And so I dug into those dimensions to see, okay, how are those defined? What are all the pieces and parts to this? So it's like putting together a puzzle, like I mentioned before. You want to start general and then drill down to the specific. Now, what you're actually going to come up with is a blend of this. You may start with the theory and evolve into the thematic, because what you're going to do, really, you're trying to answer your research questions. So you're building hypotheses, and so your literature review should unfold in a way that presents these things one at a time as you go to them. So you're going to start general and go to the specific, and it's going to be a blend, but you want to define that structure and outline your literature and your topic before you start writing. Okay, and now you're ready to actually start writing. So taking that outline that you have, build your headings, build your subheadings, build that skeleton of what your entire literature review is going to look like. It may change as you go, you may make changes to it, but that gives you a structure. Once you have that structure, now you can flesh that out and make it bigger. Employ summary tables. If you've got tables that summarize everything you talked about, for example, when I looked at engagement attitude, that was a construct. Within that construct, I had several dimensions. I laid all those out. When I got to the end, I made one summary table that presented that entire construct, that whole piece of the table. And so it's important to do things like that so it helps your reader keep track of what you're trying to present. Use transition phrases when you go from section to section. If you're moving from the dependent variable to the independent variable, that's the antecedent, say that. Use a transition phrase, and then periodically summarize when you get to points where that makes sense. You want to emphasize relatedness between the constructs that you're dealing with, and you want to flesh out that outline. You want to start with a rough draft, and the rough draft, it's not important that it be perfect. Trying to wordsmith it and get it perfect is just going to sidetrack you. What you want to do here is get all your ideas on paper. get the synthesis out of your literature and into your narrative, and then make a second rough draft where you smooth that out and focus more on transition and flow. As you put that together, you're going to be interacting with your dissertation chair, maybe with friends who are helping look at it. And as you get feedback, then you want to act on that feedback. And that becomes a cycle that you'll get feedback, you'll revise, feedback, revise, until you build it up into a final smooth product. A few little pieces of advice on writing the literature review. First, be thorough. You want to be complete in your literature review. Remember, when you finish your dissertation, you are the expert on what you just researched. So you want to be complete. You want to make sure you considered all the current state of research in the field and that you're adding to that. You want to write with authority. As the expert, you're presenting your research. You're presenting what you've wrote. So write as that expert, write with that authority. Critique rather than just reporting literature. Talk about what they said, not just say what they said. How does it fit together? Avoid excessive use of quotations. General rule of thumb, I usually go by not more than 6% of the narrative being quotations. Less is better. I can read what they wrote if I want to know what they said. What I'm interested in reading is what you say. So anytime you can use synthesis and paraphrase and present your argument, that's much better than quoting what somebody else said. Be selective. Even though you're trying to get the full scope, don't be repetitive. Present each angle, but don't, if you drew the same thing from more than one sources, put it in your words and just cite the several sources that you built it from. Be careful not to plagiarize as you're going through. You don't want to cut and paste. You want to put everything in your words. You want to critique the literature, not duplicate it. You're not wanting to do the same thing somebody else did. You're wanting to do it your way. And always use primary sources where possible. You never want to have a citation where it says, according to this researcher, this other researcher said something. You want to use the primary sources, go back to the original source, so you're reading what they really said and not what somebody thinks about what they said.
Thank you, Dr. Cromer. We are going to hear now from our doctoral candidates. First, we're going to start with Robert Robinson. Robert has served in the U.S. military for more than 17 years, became a staff sergeant. He received his Bachelor of Arts in History from the Pennsylvania State University, a Master of Arts in Organizational Management from Ashford University. And Robert holds the Demonstrated Master Logistician certification from the International Society of Logistics and co-published an article on seaport operations in the Army Sustainment magazine. So he started his Ph.D. With us with a focus on leadership in winter 2016. And as I said before, he successfully defended his dissertation in May 2020 and is working on the revisions and final approval. Again, thank you again for sharing with us your experience.
Definitely, I'm super excited to be here. I just want to say good afternoon or good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. Overall, I just want to jump right into literature review. Is probably one of the most important things that you can get right in the dissertation or in your program. So what I would say is it's important to cast a wide net using a web search. A lot of individuals will say stay away from Wikipedia. That's partially true. However, Wikipedia can be a great place to start. What I do is I find a topic or a theory using Wikipedia, Google. You can go to the reference pages, the reference sections of those articles you find on Wikipedia. Then you take those actual articles and then you go into the Trident library to check for the credibility. It saves a lot of time. Also, you want to go ahead and review research articles early and often. So in my case, I actually had an article on Mission Command written by the U.S. Army. It was in their doctrine, so it was definitely something I had to use, and that was important for my literature review. But during the course of me writing my dissertation, they actually updated the regulation. So I had to go back in and ensure that no key items were changed, and then also update that in my references and literature as well. Also want to touch on what happens a lot of times. People think that an article is not relevant, they just throw it aside. Don't always just instantly jump to that conclusion. Go ahead and put it, save it on your computer, and then you want to label that file for easy retrieval. So that's an approach that I used. Also, you want to back up your work. So just because it's on your computer is not safe always. So use a cloud, removable hard drive. Email can actually be a great way to save your spreadsheets for cataloging purposes. Now, some problems and challenges, were several, but I think one of the biggest ones that stuck out to me that was a problem was wasted time. So I ended up wasting a significant amount of time on articles that seemed to be perfect. And as Dr. Cromer and Dr. Guzman spoke to, articles may look good up front, but when you dig into them, they could be, an opinion piece, or they don't actually have the content that you need. So just be aware of that. But once again, just set it aside and save it, because you don't know if you may come across something later that it can be used for. And then the solution I used, Dr. Cromer did touch on it, which is review that abstract. It's at the beginning of articles for a reason. So that's a great approach to look at that. And then, yes, you can jump to the end and compare the two to get a better understanding of the entire article. But I also checked the reliability scores to see if I could even use this for empirical data to help with my research. And then review the recommendations and discussions. And then what I would do is I actually highlight those sections as well to make sure that I can use that when I was talking about chapters 4 and 5. When you get towards the end of your dissertation, you maybe want to talk about a discussion, so you can say, how did one article differ from yours, or you came to the same conclusion as a previous article. And then once again, just I can't stress enough, use the references at the end of articles. You can go back in time, or it can help you branch off and make sure you cover all your constructs for your study. So what I actually provided here is a excerpt from my table, or excerpt from my dissertation, and it's table 1. And I used this, and this was given to me upon guidance from my doctoral mentor, as well as the committee. And what this helps to do is it ties in your research question to your hypotheses, and that for a reader is important, because as you probably already know, there's going to be a lot of pages in your dissertation as a whole, but we're just talking just literature review. My literature review, I would imagine, is probably on the shorter end, 24 pages. I ended up using 69 references, but having tables such as this helps the reader to refresh their thoughts, their memories as they read through it. And the software used, I did put Warp PLS 6.0 down here. Now that was for the analysis phase. I just put it there as an important thing to think about as you're conducting your research. Even in the literature phase, you may come across different articles that use different analysis programs. So keep that in mind. For myself, I ended up using Excel, MS Word, and then I used a lot of different files I created separately on my computer for cataloging purposes, and then once again, backing them up. So you see several of my topics I listed below, and the one topic there, Mission Command, which is in the center of the table, was the one I was referring to that changed. Also of importance to note is some of your variables, you'll think, oh, well, organizational citizenship behavior or follower innovation. Well, that's the same thing in every article. Be careful with that, especially depending on what those are. They may have different meanings. So that's why you have to definitely read your articles carefully and make sure that you understand what you're reading and then catalog it accordingly.
Thank you very much, Robert. Appreciate it. I guess this is a great advice, and I know it's good advice. And let's see what kind of questions we get from the participants. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Ryan Durbin, and he is a DBA candidate at Trident. He has worked with the Washington State Patrol since 2005. He currently supervises the criminal investigative units for the Western Washington region, stationed at the WSP headquarters. And during his career, he has held numerous supervisory roles, including his previous role in the Special Operations Division, where he was responsible for the safety of the state capitol campus, as well as criminal investigations from crimes occurred in the 468-acre campus. In 2018, Ryan was promoted to the rank of RCW Lieutenant, assigned to the Special Operations Division. He is also a Trident MBA alum, and as I said, he is now a DBA candidate at Trident. And thank you again for sharing your experience. Ryan, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll jump right to it. So some of the strategies that I used, similar to what Robert was just talking about, is considering, industries beyond what your main focus might be. For my study, it was the law enforcement, specifically the Washington State Patrol, and how they recruit female and minority candidates. Not a lot of topics or articles that I could find specific to the State Patrol, so I had to kind of broaden my search. And so I considered other industries and areas, and that was very helpful. I could find a lot of human resource management articles, some legal reviews, case law, looking at Title VII implications, and that was huge in setting up kind of that history, which is really kind of the approach that I took for my literature review. Was really kind of establishing a historical perspective of what law enforcement has historically done, what they currently do, and kind of some of the changes that the industry is seeing in the recruitment of female minorities. The next approach I took was to narrow the search results. So initially, you'll get a lot of responses back, and you're gonna have to kind of come up with some good filters or mechanisms to narrow that down into some relevant articles, because you won't be able to read the thousands of articles that will pop up. And as Dr. Cromer suggested, reading the abstract is very important, but also reading the conclusion. Is you don't want to start reading the abstract and then think this is it and get all the way through, several hundred pages only to realize that the conclusion is not the same kind of conclusion that you were hoping for. So definitely read the conclusions. I read that right away. And then, as everybody's touched on before, is finding those references and reading other references. That was very helpful for mine. That was one of the ways that I found. One of the theories I ended up using was through researching other references, and that really helped identify other resources that I could go and find. One of the other strategies that I'll talk about here in a moment is a software, Mendeley. And if you use Mendeley, it's helpful because it can also help recommend other references that if you start reading certain articles, it will identify that that's a subject that you're interested in. And you can create keywords that you search for, and then it will recommend other articles that you might be interested in. And that isn't always helpful, but a lot of times it can be very helpful. So some of the challenges that I run into were not finding that perfect article, which is very hard, and maybe you'll find one. I had a few that were very applicable and then lots that were not. But what you don't want to do, like Robert just said, is discard them early on, because you may not know which kind of direction your study might go later on. And so saving those things and cataloging them is an approach that I recommend. Again, I use Mendeley, and you can create a lot of different folders. And so I had a top folder that I created for articles that were what I thought were the most valuable, and then other subcategories for different sections that I wanted to do for my literature review. And then saving those, at least in Mendeley, is very helpful because you can do keyword search. So it'll search every article that you save as long as you save the PDF. And then you can pull up just that one specific section that you're looking for within all of the maybe hundreds of articles that you saved. So for my study, I had 3 research questions. You can see them here. My literature review ended up being 40 pages. I used so far 113 references. And again, Mendeley has been the software that I used. I did try Zotero, a couple others, EndNote and OneNote. For me, just Mendeley was an easier solution. Like I said, you can really use a lot of search fields and search all of the article. You can also highlight portions of it very easily. And so some of the keywords that I used in finding the references are listed here below. But looking for things that are beyond just the law enforcement industry were very helpful. So I looked at a lot of articles that had to do with just female recruitment strategies. And then that brought it really wide into a whole bunch of different industries. And that's where I found one of the other theories that I ended up using in my study was not for law enforcement at all. It was actually used in academia, but it's very applicable as far as how minorities were recruited to different schools and looking at what kinds of things can be leveraged in influencing how candidates consider schools or consider a career. And so there's a lot of other industries that you may not immediately identify as being helpful. And that's really where, if you don't discard it right away and really can do a lot more research, you might come back to those other articles and they'll be helpful later on.
Excellent input. Thank you so much, both of you, Robert and Ryan. This is great to share knowledge, and I appreciate again everybody's input and presentations. We are going to start with questions, and Danny, please go ahead and let us know what questions you get from the audience. Thank you. Danny, we cannot hear you.
I think we all do that at least once a day during a meeting, especially lately with all these web meetings. Sorry about that. But anyway, I just want thank all of our presenters, both our doctoral candidates and our doctoral faculty. And we do have a few questions in already. And as a reminder, if you have any questions, you can submit them on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. And it looks like everyone quickly found it because we had a few come in quickly. So I'm want to start with Dr. Cromer. During your presentation, you talked about writing with authority. Could you give an example of that, please?
I can. When you're writing your dissertation, you become the expert. So you're the one that knows, even though you're relying on other experts that know their components of it better than you, the position you're putting forward and the research you're putting forward, you are the most recent expert in that area. You're putting it together. So you want to write as if it's coming from you. You don't want to write as if researcher A said this and researcher B said this and just present what others said. You want to state it as if it's coming from you, writing directly to the reader. You're the expert. You're referencing these other people, but you want to write with the authority of someone who knows what they're talking about. Did that answer that question?
Yeah, we'll hear what our participant has to say about it. But let's move on to the next question. Let me see here. We just had a few come in. I'm going to start this question with Ryan, and then I also want Robert to answer it next as well. But Ryan, At what time in your program did you really start collecting all of your articles?
Yeah, great question. I knew early on when I started my DBA project, the general topic that I wanted. And so really from the beginning of starting my DBA project, that's when I started to look for our research articles, gathering information from my organization, and then really just doing search. And so I think that's a really good approach. If you have ideas now when you start your program, is to just on a regular basis see what's out there. And again, I started just saving those as PDFs into Mendeley. And then I would say within the first few courses, you really start your actual DSP. And that's really where you can start refining it, is you really know kind of what direction you're going to get input from your different professors, and you start to refine it. And then that really gets you kind of hyper-focused in which direction you're going to go. But I would say as early as you start the project, start thinking about, where do you want to go, what kind of articles, and then really that starts feeding the beast, is you start building this huge repertoire of articles. And then really, if you start doing that early, when you identify what your research questions are, you have a really good host of information to kind of whittle through. And then that really propels you into, narrowing down where you want to go.
Thank you. And Robert, do you have any advice to add to that for our student question?
Yes. So Dr. Guzman, I remember when I filled out my application, and one of the questions was basically, what's your idea behind your study? What's your focus? And it got me thinking, wow, I'm applying. I haven't even started school yet, and they're already asking me what I'm going to do my dissertation on. So I think that gave you that, better start saving some things. So starting with the first class, I actually saved each folder, still have them, and every article I used for any papers within there, I put them aside. And I'm glad I did, because I went back to them later and then reorganized them, recataloged. So right from the beginning, I'd start saving articles.
Great. Great advice, both of you, and hopefully it'll help our student out. I'm going to go to Dr. Guzman on this. And question is, how do you manage the expiration of references that age out as you write your dissertation over 2 or 3 years?
Well, depending on what kind of literature you're using, some of them are, many references are still relevant even though they are not that recent, especially seminal pieces, theoretical pieces, they are still relevant even though they were published 10 or even 20 years ago. So it really depends on what kind of literature we're talking about. What we require is to have always a combination of seminal pieces, articles that are relevant in the field, especially the theoretical pieces. But when it comes to the empirical ones, you definitely want to have publications that are no more than 5 years old. So you want to have a combination, I would say 50-50, in some cases it's 60-40, 60 with the more recent ones. But do not assume that they are aged or useless just because of the year when they were published. It really depends on, again, the topic.
Great. Thank you. And next question for you, Dr. Cromer. Is there a dissertation mentor that students can get feedback from and direction from during the dissertation process?
When they're going through their coursework, their professor is the best person. Once they finish their qualification exam, then they're going to have a dissertation chair assigned, and that dissertation chair is the primary person they would go to. Dr. Guzman and I are always available also if they have questions that are beyond that, or the dissertation chair has questions, then we can help out with that and do additional mentoring. We're always careful to keep the chair in that loop, because the chair is the one that's married up with that person doing that dissertation, that's giving them the most guidance. But we're all available as resources as needed.
Thank you. And mentioning the chair for the newer students out there, how closely should the chair and the student be working through, whether it's the DSP or the dissertation?
I can speak to that one.
Yeah.
Very closely. Usually the relationship with the student is what really drives that, but you really want to be in contact every couple of weeks, but it varies depending on what stage of the writing there is. Sometimes maybe not quite as frequent. Sometimes you may need to talk every week. Sometimes just as important as the frequency of the contact is the mode of contact. I speak with many of my students over the telephone or by email, but sometimes that's just not enough. So I set up a live session to actually go online and review things in a more face-to-face collaborate type environment. And so really it's the chair and the student should work closely together. The closer they work together, the easier task the student's going to have of managing their research. It's important to keep the focus. It is the student's dissertation. They're writing the dissertation. What the dissertation chair is doing is coaching them along the way. And so really the needs of the student should drive that relationship.
Okay. Great, thank you. And let's bring Ryan and Robert back. And and you two should definitely stay on camera because you're becoming popular interview subjects from our audience. So I'll probably have a few questions your way, but I'm going to start with Robert on this one. And this is something that Dr. Cromer touched on, and given your relative, I guess, familiarity with it, because you're right in it right now, but what's your recommendation for article management or data management tools? We have a person here who's currently using OneNote and some others. And if you could share the others, that would be great. But what is your recommendation? Let's start with Robert and then go to Ryan.
So I know there are several programs out there that can assist in cataloging and maintaining your references. OneNote, I've heard of it. I've used it sporadically. It just doesn't fit my style. I'm more of, I want to see the actual file, the actual article. So I go ahead and I save that, on my computer, and then I combine that with either, a spreadsheet or a Word document, so I can get a reference list as well. So I use a combination of that. And then I also want to say that I also use the Trident e-portfolio whenever I have a good idea or I think something's important. Has a little bubble. You can just type something in there real quick while you're doing your coursework in there, and then come back to it later. But I don't use any other programs other than that specifically.
And Ryan, any insight on your end on that question?
Yeah, I kind of spoke to it earlier. I really am a proponent of Mendeley. I've tried Evernote, and I tried EndNote and OneNote. For me, Mendeley just works easier because it automatically then inserts it if you're using Word and you do the plugin. When you're doing your reference, you're actually writing your DSP, for my case, automatically it drops in your reference, and then you can search within Mendeley to do some cross-referencing. Like I said, if you save your PDF within that as your reference catalog, it'll have all of your articles in one location. And so it's really easy then to pull up. If you can't remember maybe which specific article you were using, you can start typing the keyword that you remember from that article, and it'll pull it up. And then for me, I used a lot of highlighting, PDF style, and you can highlight a whole bunch of different colors. And so that quickly allows me to search and cross-reference things. I would highlight figures or different things I found interesting when I read it the first time, and then I can really quickly go back, and you can even tag certain things in there if you want to go back later. So for me, that was just the easiest. It was the most helpful. I use OneNote for work a lot, and it serves a good purpose there, but I didn't really find it as useful with the DSP.
Okay. And since you mentioned Mendeley, to quickly answer this question, someone just asked, is there a cost for Mendeley?
No, what I use is free. It's just a free download, and then it was a free plugin for Microsoft Word.
I just want to mention to that topic that we do have a core webinar on how to cite journal articles. And in that core webinar, we discussed a little bit of Mendeley and Zotero. I mean, those definitely are very powerful. I mean, Mendeley became really powerful lately and compared to what it used to be. And both Zotero and Mendeley are free. So it's really convenient, and they have multiple videos that also go teach you how to use it. So those are two software that we recommend. And as I said, we also have a core webinar on those that is in our database.
Yeah, good to mention that, and make sure that when we send around the link to this webinar, we'll send a link to that webinar as well, which can be found on our core webinar page. And that link will be shared towards the end of the presentation. Going back to Dr. Cromer, there's the whole topic of writing with authority seems pretty popular right now. But so next question is, a person who they understand the concept of writing with authority. However, what recommendations do you have on keeping the literature review and dissertation simple while also being scholarly?
The easiest way is when you start with outlining. When you outline your literature review first, then you have a structure to it that is easy for the reader to follow. The second thing is to make sure your headings make sense, that is descriptive. The headings guide the reader through, particularly if it's a complex article, and so they take them from point to point. The other way to keep it simple is to summarize periodically. One tool that I used was using somebody that didn't know anything about what I was writing. And so my wife read everything I wrote. And so as I was doing the literature review, I would pass it to my wife and have her read it and have her tell me what I wrote. If she couldn't make it through it, I knew it was something wrong with it. If she couldn't present the main points back to me, then I knew I didn't say it as well. And so you have to remember that you're writing to the reader. So you want to be scholarly, but you also want to keep it direct and make your points clear. And how you organize that content has a lot to do with that. You don't want a lot of repetition. You don't want to bounce back and forth. You just want to present things in a straightforward manner. And the easiest way to do that is with a good solid outline, and don't use complex sentences too much. Sometimes you have to, but just try to keep it simple. You're writing directly to the reader. So when you read it as if you're the reader and see if it makes sense.
Great, thank you. And do our panelists have anything further to add to that?
The only thing I would add is when you're reading your articles, you'll be able to see good and bad examples of that. If you read the article and you're scratching your head that it made no sense, then you know that was not well written for your average reader. And I think you'll see lots of good examples of both kinds. And so just keep that in mind when you're writing yours.
And I want to add to that also, specifically, for instance, like organizational citizenship behavior. People go, what is that? So right there, if you don't know what that is, or someone looks at you funny, then that's another tip. Like, hey, maybe I need to explain that a little bit. So it even goes to the terms you're using within your dissertation itself.
Yeah. And there seems to be a theme here. So is there a trick in kind of determining who the audience should be that you're writing for the dissertation? I mean, let's start with Robert, since I know that you're pretty far along with yours.
Yes, I think mine was actually a little difficult because you have academia meshed with a military setting, if you will. So I had to be able to address both correctly. So there were times where I was explaining things to, let's say, the military community in my paper that I knew they would know. but also likewise the academia as well. So I think you just have to go ahead and explain things clearly, plainly. Clear and concise is very important. So you want to speak to as many people in a larger community as you can.
Great. Thank you. And let's see, next question we have here, let's see. Dr. Guzman, I'm going to send this one your way. Are we able to reach out to, or are we able to include relevant published work from Trident doctoral alums or faculty members as part of literature reviews?
Yes, as I said, when we talk about types of literature review, dissertations are also empirical pieces, right? And that you can read and cite. As long as you cite them as you cite any other reference, you're good to use it. So you are fine with that. Just use a correct citation.
Okay, great. And let's see, it looks like we only have one more question here. So as a reminder, if you have any more questions, just send them in on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. And we're going to end with our doctoral candidates. Same question for both of them, and we'll start with Ryan this time. You talked about challenges faced while doing your literature review. How long did it take for you to realize that it was a challenge and for you to address that challenge and get past it? And did it significantly hold up your research?
Yeah, I think as soon as I started narrowing down that my topic is going to be about the recruitment strategies for law enforcement, and I initially just sat down and, okay, this will be an easy search, and I typed in recruitment and females, minorities, and I got, several thousand responses like, oh, this is going to be a little bit more challenging to kind of refine this. And so I think you immediately kind of realize that this is going to be a huge undertaking, and then also kind of the guidelines of how long that literature review needs to be. But I think once you start compiling those articles, and luckily for me, I started very early, and so the challenge was maybe not as daunting because I had already established some really good articles. So I think you recognize that early once you get that assignment and you're starting to see like how lengthy that process is going to be. And if you've ever read any kind of dissertation, kind of the general outline that they all have. And if you think about the literature review as just creating the foundation of where your research is going to go and why, and if you kind of keep that at the core of your mind, it should get easier. Is the reason why you're explaining all of these different things, or to set that really good foundation for where your research is going to go and really the why behind it. And I think if you, to Dr. Cromer's point, is really create that foundational organization of what your literature review is going to achieve, and that should help guide, what specifically you need to address. If it's going to be a history of what your topic is, then it kind of breaks it down. It doesn't make it as daunting because it's just a little bit. And if you write a little bit at a time, over a few weeks, you'll look back and you've written 40, 50 pages, and it wasn't this impossible task that it seems like at the very beginning. So if you take little chunks of that pie every day, it really becomes an easier process. Instead of just sitting down and having thousands and thousands of things to read, just start reading them, slowly every night, and then you just start writing down bits and pieces of each one of those articles, and it really makes it an easier process.
And Robert?
Yes, so probably a slightly different approach than Ryan. I'm more of, I'm going to read as much as I can and then almost just throw it all down the paper, kind of like Dr. Cromer was saying. It doesn't have to be pretty, just get it out there. So I just type and type and type and type, and then, hey, lo and behold, I had 15 pages. And then I just pause right there, because the important thing is my challenge was wasted time, whether it was reading articles or trying to figure out concepts or formatting. You can go down a rabbit hole on certain things at the wrong times and you'll have some issues. So getting your ideas there are important, and then you can come back a different day when you have a fresh mind, read over it and say, wow, I can actually incorporate these other articles and start to tie it in so it makes more sense. So I would say when you get that feeling that you're either overwhelmed or you think you're a little confused or you're going the wrong way, just stop, pause right there, and decide whether you need to take a break, come back later, or maybe this article wasn't the right one to use. So I think that's a good indication for individuals to use.
Great. Great. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Ryan. And yeah, thank you everyone who asked questions and participated this evening. I'm going to hand things back to Dr. Guzman to close out the webinar tonight. Thanks.
Okay, very good. We'd like to thank everyone for attending and participating in today's core webinar, Literature Review Strategies for Doctoral Research. I think we discussed very important topics, and I hope you think about what about this core webinar you can start using and practicing as you write your literature review. It is an important topic. You see that there are different strategies. The best one is the one that you build for yourself and you feel comfortable with. At the end of the day, you can also think about publishing your research after you finish your doctoral degree, and then you will have reviewers, and you wanna, this process is blind. It's a blind review process that happens in journal publications, and these reviewers will read what you wrote, and you want them to like you. So think about that. You want to write with clarity. That's very important. Read is important, and then write and look for clarity and make sure it makes sense. I tell my students, read what you wrote, read it out loud, and see if it's making sense. And also, sometimes many of our students use external editors, professional editors that will clean that up and make sure that your dissertation is ready for publication, since it's going to be published in the database and it's going to be available for many years. But those are the final touches. I mean, you want to be the expert on the topic and conduct a good research, and it's a process. So we wanted you to see these examples. So again, thank you very much for participating, for your insightful questions. Please make sure you visit our core webinar webpage and learn more about the different core webinars that we have. As we mentioned, there is one that talks about Mendeley as well. And let us know what kind of topics you would like us to cover in these webinars. Again, I want to give a special thank you to Dr. Cromer, Robert Robinson, and Ryan Durbin. Thank you also Danny for organizing and the core webinar. And thank you all those who attended for your participation, interest, great questions. Let's continue collaborating and building knowledge. If you would like to reach out to us, this is our contact information on the screen now. Goodbye and have a great day. Thank you.